can nearly feel her red cunt. So close.
Oh, so it's gonna be one of those games. Let me just go over to Amazon. Perfect. As a pretty big horror fan and also a huge mythology nerd, I've been looking forward to Agony for a long time. Agony is a crowd-funded horror game marketed with some pretty big words and set to include a whole bunch of ultra-violence and nudity, which it more or less delivers on. The question is it actually a good game, or is it just a shock art gimmick? Well, I'm going to tell you, but first, I've got to go over a few things. Number one, I did not back this game on Kickstarter, so I do not have anything invested in this other than what I paid on Steam. Second, this game really delivers on the nudity, so if at any point in this video something is blurred or censored, you can rest assured that it's likely a set of monster girl boobs or a flaccid wiener. Third, I'm aware of the massive censorship controversy this game is currently embroiled in, and I'll be covering that towards the end of this video, as well as my thoughts on censorship in games in general. Alright, let's get into the game. So when you get to the main menu, you've got 3 game modes: Story Mode, Succubus Mode, and Agony Mode. Agony Mode and Story Mode are available from the start, but Succubus Mode isn't unlocked until you complete the story. I'll be looking at all 3 of these game modes in this video because they're all completely unique experiences from each other. Story Mode kicks off with this cutscene. We're falling through the gates of hell, and the player character gives us a little bit of background about being in hell. Essentially, you can't remember who you used to be, but everyone else stuck in hell around you knows who the Red Goddess is. Word on the street is, she created hell and might be able to help you get out. Anyone who's Bible savvy will notice that the Red Goddess is based on a figure from Revelations called the Whore of Babylon. Here she is holding a cup. Bitch, you better put down that cup. As usual, I'm going to start off with what I liked most about this game. The level design, the general environmental assets, the sound design, and the world building are all pretty good. This is, without any reasonable doubt, the best depiction of hell that anyone has ever come up with in a video game. In most games, hell is pretty standard. Sometimes it's fleshy and grotesque. Sometimes it's the classic fire and brimstone type hell. But Agony does something truly unique. You've got the rocky, dark, cave type areas. You've got the grotesque living flesh areas. But you also have totally off-the-wall interpretations that I've personally never seen done in a game before. The best example is probably these forest areas in the middle of the game. These are some of the most atmospheric, dense, and intimidating areas I've ever seen in a game, and it's hard to find words how impressive it is. The artists and designers responsible for making this are immensely talented, and I'm just going to let the sound design speak for itself. If this game won some sort of award for level design or environmental design, I wouldn't at all be mad or surprised. The inclusion of these vast-looking forest areas and some weird animals like snakes and these flying leviathans really make hell feel like a living, breathing, dynamic ecosystem rather than a static dimension full of demons and rocks, like, for example, in the Doom reboot. That being said, there are some things lacking in the visual department. For example, female human models specifically look very poorly done compared to males. I'm pretty sure this is because the developers had to downgrade them in order to meet censorship demands, but I'll talk more about that later. There's also some very, very bad voice acting. As you wander around hell, you'll run into a lot of other people. The game refers to them as martyrs. Most of them have understandably gone insane and just mull about talking to themselves, and when you're standing near them, they mutter in a very unsettling way that's actually a pretty good effect.
The goddess will suck the bones of the she succubs will devour you, you'll see.
But if you actually talk to one, they deliver the same lines with all the skill of a middle school drama student.
They'll eat you up. She and her succubs will devour you. You'll see.
In order to explain why the world building in this game is so good, I need to explain how this particular version of hell functions. In this game, if you're unfortunate enough to die and go to hell, you fall through the gates, you land naked in hell, and you're just there. That's it. You aren't imprisoned, you aren't immediately captured and tortured, you're just existing in hell. Granted, demons are all over the place trying to sniff you out, and you'll almost for sure be mangled or eaten multiple times. But other than that, you have total agency over your actions. If you're killed here, your soul escapes your body, and you can try to inhabit somebody else's body for a short time. But if you fail in doing that, this cutscene implies that you're falling back through the gates, having your memory wiped by the Red Goddess. There are also several hints along the way that this is not something that's unique to the player character. This gives the entire game a really bizarre and ironic, hopeful feeling that you wouldn't ever expect from a game set in hell. The first inkling of this feeling comes from the opening cutscene when the player character says that the Red Goddess is all any of us can remember. This implies that people are actively communicating and problem solving in hell and trying to figure out what's going on. The fact that they even have the ability to do this and choose to believe that there's an escape already speaks volumes about this place. As you progress through the game, you find a lot of letters and notes written by other humans trapped here. A lot of these letters contain hopeful messages about holding out against the demons and keeping your sanity and keeping your faith in God until you're eventually saved. You can assume this is probably in vain, but it's interesting to see the human spirit enduring in a place like this from a story perspective. There are also a couple of characters that you meet along the way that enforce this. For example, here you walk into a cave and see something that looks like an angel through these rocks. Then you go into this room and you see this guy who tells you, "Look dude, there's an angel over in that other room, and if we can get to it, we're free. Either help me move these rocks or fuck off." I don't understand why he doesn't just crawl through the hole, but I admire his work ethic. Then there's this scene, which is a goddamn masterpiece. I'm just gonna let it play out.
Psst.
So let me do a quick recap for people that might not have got what went on there. So you're running from a demon, and you run into this cave, and there's a dude waiting in the cave with a sharp stick. And he tells you to be quiet and hide. The demon comes in, and this guy spears it to death. Now another one shows up and lights him on fire, but he more or less achieved his goal. So why is this scene so good? First, let me reiterate what we established earlier. In this version of hell, people more or less have free agency. Now let me ask you a question. When the Toba supervolcano erupted and reduced the human population to 3,000, did we just sit around and go extinct? Or did we sharpen some sticks and get to work? When the Ice Age happened, did we sit around and freeze to death? Or did we look at the biggest animal with the most fur and then sharpen some sticks and get to work? So when you die and you wake up in hell, do you sit around and give up? No. You find some friends, you sharpen some sticks, and you get to fucking work. This is what people do. We adapt. That's how we made it to 2018. This is what the demons are failing to understand in this situation. This isn't a prison sentence or a punishment. This is natural selection round 2. We had a pretty goddamn strong showing in round 1. We ran around naked and killed shit with sharp sticks for about 2 million years. These guys are out of their fucking league. Now the demons might say, "No, we're gonna pin you down and eat you ass first." Well, I'm sure the Californian grizzly had a similar argument. Wrong again, idiot. And then the demons are like, "Oh, well, we're gonna kill your pregnant women and eat their babies." And then we say, "Big deal, dude. Happens all the time." And the demon tries to get out a third argument, but can't, because his lungs are full of sharp sticks. And even if you fail and get set on fire in the process, it doesn't matter, because your soul will be back one way or the other. Eventually you're gonna succeed. Also, in the notes left behind, people talk about their previous religion and God and life. So clearly they have some working knowledge on who they used to be, even if their memories get occasionally wiped. People in normal human prison have literally built crossbows out of random household items. What happens when a brilliant engineer gets sent to hell and starts building ballistas? Based on the version of hell this game is laid out, you took the most effective survivalist killing machine to ever exist on Earth and dropped it into your ecosystem and then gave it infinite lives. For all we know, there could already be a small enclave of naked stick-wielding guerrilla commandos slinking around in the caves of hell, growing in numbers and waiting until the day they can finally rise up against their oppressors. It took us 50,000 years to take over Earth. How long do you realistically think you have before this turns into this? I don't know how many sharp sticks it's gonna take to kill this guy, but that forest earlier had a lot of fucking trees. But that's enough wild interpretation. Let's actually get to gameplay. The game itself is very light on mechanics, with a very heavy emphasis on exploration. The game's world is enormously labyrinthine, and there are secrets and collectibles hidden in every corner. An enormous amount of them. I've played through the entire game completely on both story mode and Succubus mode, and I have no idea what a gold room or a red room even is. You've got paintings to unlock, notes and letters to collect that flesh out the world, statues to collect, and forbidden fruits to eat. Also, if you're wondering why that fruit was censored, it's because it's literally an apple with a fully realized female vagina. Just Google it. The statues also give you currency called knowledge, which you can use to unlock other stuff in the gallery. Exploring the world and collecting all this stuff, and finding secrets and solving all the puzzles required to do this, would be the most fun part of the game if it wasn't for literally everything else in story mode making it as fucking annoying as possible to actually accomplish this. First and foremost, Agony is a modern survival horror game, which is just a polite way of saying an Amnesia clone. This means that as a player character, you are completely helpless against the demons and other monsters lurking around hell. If you're spotted, you need to run and hide, and then sit, and wait, and wait, and wait. And then hopefully whatever is trying to skewer you fucks off and you can go back to playing the actual game. This sort of design isn't inherently bad, but Agony is completely and utterly not designed around this at all. And to explain why that is, I need to talk about checkpoints. So these weird hand octopuses are called soul mirrors, and they are your checkpoints. Except for when they aren't. So the way these work is, after you've activated one, you can die and be sent back to it 3 times. After those 3 times, the mirror deactivates and you get sent back to the previous mirror. So theoretically, you could die all the way back to the beginning of the game. But I was never demoted by more than 1 mirror. This sounds like kind of an interesting system, but the problem is there's 0 consistency. Sometimes the game will just randomly choose a save point that has nothing to do with mirrors, and you'll go back to that instead. Other times, certain mirrors will just randomly give you more than 3 lives. I'm not sure if it has something to do with the different colors of the mirrors, or maybe there was some line of text that I missed during the tutorial, but the entire thing's a mess, and a simple checkpoint system would have been more than fine. So why did I need to talk about checkpoints? Well, here's where it all starts to tie into how the rest of the game is designed. So the environment is shocking and beautiful and maze-like, which makes you want to explore it and see more of it. The game is also packed with secrets and collectibles, which makes this even more satisfying to do. The problem is, since you may or may not have a limited amount of deaths on your current checkpoint, and since running and hiding from monsters is so tedious and ruins pacing of exploration, you find yourself generally avoiding exploring areas if you know there's enemy around, and just generally trying to get to the next checkpoint as fast as possible so you don't lose progress. This game is begging you to be explored, but doing so is so tedious and annoying that you really would prefer not to. And to prove that I'm not talking out of my ass, look at these patch notes. This game has been patched twice since release, which as of me writing this was only a few days ago. Now, as you can see here, one of the first things they did is completely nuke the number of enemies in most areas of the game. That's because they got feedback and realized how antithetical their game design philosophies actually were. If this game was more of a puzzle game / walking sim instead of survival horror, it would be improved massively. Speaking of puzzles, let's talk about them. Basically, every puzzle falls into, unfortunately, one of 2 categories. You're either trying to collect hearts / skulls / body parts to place them in a spot, or you're looking for a sigil to draw on a wall. The hearts / skulls / body parts puzzles are less puzzles and more just finding keys to activate certain objects. The sigils get closer to being actual puzzles. At first, you just need to search walls until you find the right one, but eventually they get a little bit more creative. Like, for example, this part where you're wandering around a tower trying to find the right sigil, but then you notice that this moron is pointing at this moron who's pointing at the swamp, and the sigil is actually the wood floating on the swamp, and not any of the ones in the tower. That kind of stuff is cool. Solving this kind of stuff is fun, and the game really should have relied more heavily on this kind of thing. There are a couple areas that are completely inexcusable in how annoying they are. First one is this maze area that's basically the first place you get to after the tutorial. You need to wander around this maze trying not to get obliterated by booby demons and collect 3 skulls and use them to open the exit. This is such a tedious pain in the ass that the first patch in this game literally made this puzzle optional. The second puzzle that really stood out to me as being trash is in this area. So this is a classic grab hearts and stack them on the scale kind of puzzle, of which there are many. There are 4 hearts you need to find, and one is behind this door, which requires a sigil to open. All the sigils in this room are really hard to see, and on top of all this fucking tarantula made of human arms is breathing down your neck the entire time, and is an extremely annoying enemy type. So finally you get all the shit together, and you're expecting a door to open so that you can progress, but instead the statue comes to life and mangles you. Now at first you think, oh well, sometimes you have to die to progress in this game, so surely this is part of progression. Wrong, fuckface. Have fun walking back to that room, solving the puzzle again, and then trying to figure out this boss fight. Yeah, it's a boss fight that randomly pops up in a game, which, as of so far, has given zero indication of any way to actually damage enemies. Well, I'm being sort of unfair. First off, after I finished the game, I started doing some research, and this fight is apparently part of one of several secret endings in the game, so it might be optional and I might be an idiot. Secondly, the game does mention at the very beginning that the torch can ward off lesser enemies, but I have no idea what it's talking about. The only other enemies up to this point are the arm tarantulas and the booby demons, neither of which give any real shit about the torch. So here's how this works. You just need to run through one of these cracks, and then loop around and torch this thing 3 times like you're playing a Zelda game, and then it fucks off. Literally nothing about this makes sense. Why does the game randomly make me powerful enough to scare off a giant demon here? Why does nothing like this happen again for the rest of the game? And then to make this section even more confusing, you go down into the area that you unlock, die, and then find out that you unlocked the possession ability at some point and can possess this demon now. Then you jump down this hole as the demon. And now I need to stress here that this game's progression is enormously convoluted, and I'm fairly sure there are multiple ways to reach the end. So maybe I unlocked this possession ability earlier and I didn't notice, or maybe there's another way that you're supposed to get it that makes more sense. But the fact that I barely remember how or why this ability unlocks in the first place is a testament to how poorly it's actually implemented into the game. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait, a possession skill, I didn't realize this game had skills, that's because they're so pointless that I forgot to include them up until this point in the video. Those lady apples I showed earlier actually give you skill points, which you can use to unlock skills that make a virtually undetectable difference in gameplay. But the possession skill is a little bit different. You can't take points in this skill with the apples, and they just sort of unlock randomly at various parts of the game. And since we're talking about skills, now is probably a good time to go into detail on this possession mechanic. This was one of the game's major selling points. Let's take a look at how the developers talk about this particular bullet point. Here's the quote they use in all the marketing to talk about this. If a special ability to control people on their path, and even possess simple-minded demons, gives the player the necessary measures to survive, even in the extreme conditions they're in. Okay, sounds good, right? Well, here's what the quote should actually say. Special ability to control people, but really it's more of a weird extra life system. Also, you can control demons sometimes, but it's really inconsistent. Also, it's usually during a cutscene. Also, the events happening during the possession are usually scripted. And again, I feel the need to state that maybe I'm confused on how this works. For example, I didn't find out until I had already finished the game that you can only possess humans after taking the sack off their head, because it's never really taught to you, so you just play the game thinking there are randomly people you can't possess. I suppose I'm willing to take the fault for that one, but the demon possession is also really inconsistent. Sometimes you just won't be able to possess a demon you're next to for no reason. On top of all of this, you can't leave your body voluntarily. You need to either die or find one of these very specific points that prompt you to leave your body. Because of this, most of the time you don't ever want to try to possess a demon, because the aforementioned inconsistency means you might risk just dying for no reason and getting sent back to your last checkpoint. And finally, playing as the demon gives you this really obnoxious filter over everything that makes the game look terrible. It's very clear how the developers intended this to be implemented. Each demon you can play has unique abilities. The Onoskelis demon is fast and agile and has a unique fireball attack. The Chort demons are big strong boys. These fire elemental guys can fly, and later in Succubus Mode and Agony Mode, when you play as a succubus, you have his wall climb ability. All of this clearly points to the fact the developers intended all these demons to have specific abilities that would allow you to progress and solve puzzles in different ways. This is basically not done. You can find even more evidence of this in these unlockable prototype videos of demon gameplay. Also, a quick side note, anyone with Styx brain cells would know that these prototype videos were scripted events with way over-tuned visuals that would need to be downgraded later on. These are the kind of videos that devs use to con crowdfunding backers and publishers into funding them. I'm not saying that Madmind Studios are unethical or anything, but when you see videos and trailers like this as a consumer, you need to be skeptical. So this is a very, very disappointing missed opportunity for Agony. Not only would possessing different demons to gain different abilities to progress be interesting, but it also would have added a lot more to the entire plotline of the character getting more and more consumed by hell. Dialogue lines from the Red Goddess are constantly hinting towards this being the case, but they don't make any sense because odds are you're not thinking about possessing a demon to go on a rampage, but rather thinking about sprinting to the next checkpoint. My final point on the poor implementation of this entire system is in relation to that thing I said earlier about sometimes having to die to progress. Because dying just releases your soul and you can grab a new body, the game teaches you early on that there will be times where you need to dive off a cliff to your death only to snag a new skin suit at the bottom. This is cool. The only problem is you never really know when this is necessary, and sometimes you'll just drop to your death for no reason, find nothing to possess, and then get volleyball spiked back to a checkpoint by a flying octopus. Here's a side note. In the same area that I got that footage, there's an Easter egg of 2 frozen statues doing the fusion dance from Dragon Ball Z. Some say they were turned to stone for fear that they would discover their true power as Saiyans. The complete and total failure of this possession mechanic is probably the second biggest black spot on Agony's record. The first is the bugs. My fucking god, the bugs. But before I get into the specifics of this, I need to mention 2 points. One, as of my writing this script, 2 patches have been released within about a week of this game's release that have fixed a lot of these bugs, with a third one on the way. So most of these will likely be fixed soon, and some are already fixed. 2, this game literally only credits 5 playtesters, so the number of bugs kind of makes sense. Here's a list of bugs that I found in my 2 playthroughs. Sometimes the game would randomly freeze in soul mode, forcing a restart. This one's been fixed. Sometimes I would also randomly get stuck on the environment, forcing a restart, which has apparently also been fixed. Then you have this area where a cutscene plays, and then you move forward and do some stuff, and then you backtrack through, and the cutscene bugs out and plays again with an invisible enemy. In Succubus Mode, this waterfall randomly kills you. I think this one is fixed, but I'm not really sure. And the final cutscene played with missing audio, I think. Maybe it was intended to only be music, but who knows. The forced restarts were enormously frustrating and made me avoid dying at all costs, even more so than the rest of the shit I already mentioned ruining the pacing of exploration. But if you're watching this months or years after Agony's release date, I don't think you should let this affect your decision to buy the game, because more than likely these problems have been addressed. So that pretty much covers story mode from a visual and mechanical perspective, but let's get into the actual story itself. If you're a huge lore/mythology nerd like I am, you're gonna get pretty hot and bothered when the game starts mentioning names like Ishtar and Inanna. Inanna was an ancient goddess of like 50 different things worshipped by the Sumerians, whose name was later changed to Ishtar by the Babylonians. The implication that the game seems to be making here is that Ishtar, Inanna, and the Red Goddess, and therefore the Whore of Babylon that I mentioned earlier, are all really the same entity. This is a popular theory among real-world religious scholars, and it sort of makes sense in a real-world context. If you're trying to spread your religion around, and the guy across the street worships Ishtar, you might say, look dude, don't worship that dirty slut over in Babylon. She holds cups. You want to worship my man God. He's never held a cup in his life. Well, I mean, his son holds cups, but that doesn't happen until later. And then you would go off and write a bunch of crazy shit about her in your holy book, like this loading screen Bible verse. There is also some real-world speculation that the Whore of Babylon could be the Egyptian goddess Isis, so clearly the game is implying that the Red Goddess has gone by many names across time. In fact, in more modern mythology, famous occultist Aleister Crowley founded a spiritual system he called Thelema, which features a figure called Babylon, who is referred to as the Scarlet Woman. Scarlet Woman, Red Goddess. The Red Goddess isn't the only part of the story with interesting real-world ties. This also extends to several other characters. This asshole is Baphomet, a relatively modern pagan symbol with some pretty complicated history involving the Knights Templar and some French guy who couldn't pronounce the name Muhammad. That's interesting, but you'll notice that in Agony, the developers made a choice to make him look more like a cow than a goat. You know, like that golden cow from the Bible. And this dude on the title screen is the seven-headed beast. You know, like the one the whore is riding on in this picture that I keep showing, as described in that Bible verse from earlier. Agony's storyline also takes you through several mythologically important areas. The Tower of Babel makes an appearance, and in the forest area, the Red Goddess tells you to go to this Tree of Life because it connects to heaven. The writers or developers of this game didn't just pull that out of their ass. The Tree of Life connecting Earth to heavens and the underworld is a symbol that pops up in a bunch of different cultures all over the place in the real world. You also have this strange psychedelic swamp area called the Mushroom Mind. This one might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think this area is supposed to allude to traditional shamanistic belief systems that use hallucinogens, like mushrooms, for example, as part of their religions. Mushrooms also have a really controversial link to Christianity, which you can read about in this book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. Alright, so we have this fantastic combination of all this mythology and culture from all over the ancient world and the Bible, so what does Agony do with it? Are they setting up some awesome Gnostic storyline where every god being worshipped is really just the Red God or one of her demonic followers like Baphomet trying to trick people into hell? Well, no. Actually, instead of anything like that, or anything really coherent, Agony decides to do nothing. The game has 7 endings, only a couple of them seem to even remotely connect to each other in some bizarre, non-linear way, and almost none of this mythology or these storylines are followed up on, with the exception of the Seven-Headed Beast. As soon as you start realizing all the connections between characters and locations, the game just sort of abruptly ends in a very disappointing fashion. Overall, the story was enormously flawed, and I wasn't really impressed with anything other than level design and some world-building details. Alright, let's move on to Succubus Mode, which is by far the best mode in the game. In Succubus Mode, you play as a character you met during Story Mode, referenced as the Priestess. She has a great personality, and is just a really funny and intelligent girl. She's actually graduating with a degree in chemical engineering soon. You just don't see that many women in STEM fields. I think it's great. So first and foremost, playing as a succubus completely obliterates all element of survival horror. You have a claw attack, which kills anything. You can also do these attacks to take hearts out of people, which you can then use to do a neat voodoo doll type attack, which uses up the heart, and then you've got to borrow a new one. This is fine, that guy's just gonna grab a new body. Because you no longer need to be afraid of enemies, you are completely and totally free to explore the map and look for secrets unhindered, and this feels absolutely amazing. This feeling is turned up to 11 by finding these secret doors that only open for the succubus, and these grapple points you can climb to reach completely new areas. You can run through the entire game in a couple hours as a succubus, and it's actually really ironically relaxing to just run around and find statues while being invincible. This really paints a picture of how great this game's story mode could have and should have been. And finally, you've got Agony Mode. Agony Mode is all the worst parts of story mode condensed into a small, convenient package. In Agony Mode, you start in this tower. From here, you can enter a couple different procedurally generated dungeons, where the objective is to unlock the level exit using one of the game's 2 puzzle types, while avoiding enemies and completing bonus challenges for a better score. When you complete a level, you can turn into the succubus and backtrack to grab some more collectible stuff for some more points. This game mode also has a leaderboard for some reason. This mode is enormously tedious and frustrating. I think this weird thing up in the corner is a map, but who fucking knows. I finished a couple levels and then quit after I started a new one, and instantly got killed by a demon at the level entrance. Agony Mode is really bad. Agony is a fantastic game world trapped inside a game that at its best is mediocre and at its worst is completely unplayable. The developers are clearly very passionate about this game and are doing their best to fix its problems and work with what they've made, but that being said, the game is short, and in its current state, and for its current price, you'd probably be better off taking that $30, going to a local hardware store to buy some rope so you can hang yourself and go to real hell. It'd probably be a lot more exciting. But if you're watching this video after the big fixes and you really love horror games and maybe you catch it on a bit of a sale, it might not disappoint you. Alright, as promised, now that I've covered what I thought of the actual game, it's time to cover the total shit show that is the controversy surrounding this game. First, we need to talk a little bit about how games are rated. The 2 biggest entities that rate video games are the ESRB in North America and Pegi in Europe. Let's take a look at the ESRB first. They have some goofy early childhood ratings up at the top for educational software and that kind of thing, and then you get to the 3 that everybody is familiar with: E, T, and M. Then you have the notorious AO rating that almost no one even knows exists and is incredibly rare. The AO rating is a complete death sentence for a game in the United States. If your game gets this rating, most publishers won't touch it, retail stores won't sell it for consoles, and Steam is going to have some difficulty picking it up. The existence of this rating also doesn't really make any sense. You already have M, which specifically says anyone over 17, which would classify adults. But then you say the adults only rating you need to wait an additional year for, as if the difference between 17 and 18 has that much developmental growth behind it. Moving on to the Pegi system, these seem a little bit more streamlined. You've got Pegi 3, 7, 16, and 18, which all correspond to the recommended age of the player. Again, I'd like to call into question the real difference between someone who's 16 or 18, but that's besides the point. So, where did Agony get into trouble? Well, as you might have guessed, the ESRB was about to slap Agony with the dreaded AO rating, and Pegi was not allowing them to be passed for rating at all, which would result the game being banned for a console release and likely completely hamstrung in the EU PC market. So MadMind offered a compromise and said, how about we retail a censored version of the game and then we offer an uncensored patch that some can choose to install. The ESRB said, okay, but the patch will be AO. Okay, that sounds reasonable, but what did Pegi say? They said, fuck you, we'll sue you. So the developers were more or less forced to censor some aspects of their game in order to meet Pegi's demands if they hoped to make any of their money back at all. In order to try and assuage their angry supporters, they released footage of what they had to remove. However, on seeing old gameplay prototypes and demos, it's clear that more than just the deleted scenes were censored. I won't be showing any of the cut content here because it's mostly nudity, but I'll give you a list of what was cut, as well as things that I noticed that were censored when compared to earlier iterations of the game. In addition, I should specify that some of this is speculative on my part. The legal issues were sort of unspecified when Madmind talked about them, but doing a little bit of research online, it's kind of easy to gather what happened. That being said, here's the list of things that were cut. 2 graphic sex scenes, one of which being a demon raping another demon. A full frontal demon birth scene. A very, very small percentage of this game's otherwise colossal amount of baby murder. Jiggle physics on butts and boobs. All vaginas except for the apples. And a large percentage of male nudity. So why are people so upset about this removed content? Well, on my many travels through internet comment sections to uncover the truth, it seems that most people fall into one of 3 categories. The first category, henceforth known as the dick beaters, are upset because the monster girls are now less fully realized and therefore more difficult to jerk to. I mean, I suppose these guys have a point. This was a clear selling point for the game, and if you don't believe me, look at this 3D model viewer. And if you're thinking, but Jacob, that doesn't mean anything. Doom 2016 had a 3D model viewer, and it was just for appreciating art. Then I dare you to listen to the music they included here, and tell me it's not dick-beatin' tunes. The second category of mad nerds are the Kickstarter backers that specifically funded the game with the intentions of funding the most heinously vile video game possible. They're mad because the developers weren't able to realize their vision of the game and that their money wasn't used correctly. And the last category, which is the one that I fall into, is people who are fundamentally opposed to censorship on principle and think that complaints made by censors, such as Pegi for example, are invalid and inconsistent bullshit. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at the censored material that I mentioned earlier. The first thing that you'll notice is that almost all of this censored content is sexual in nature, and the implication of it seems to be that the overwhelming violence in the game is somehow dwarfed by the relatively mundane nude scenes. Well, you can rip her heart out of her throat, but the nipples need to be obscured, otherwise it's offensive. Yeah, so this part is good, but you might want to do something about the penises, because those are what is the most offensive part about the image that I'm currently seeing. These are the arguments of deranged lunatics. And next up, referring back to the list, you'll notice the overwhelming amount of censored material focuses on female nudity specifically. This seems to imply that the female body is somehow more offensive than the male body, which is complete and total horseradish. And in addition, only a percentage of the nudity has been removed. These demons still have jiggle physics. There's plenty of dudes walking around with dropped trout, and these apples still have flesh wallets even if the female models don't. So the question becomes, what's the fucking point? Is there some magic dick threshold wherein once passed through the game suddenly becomes offensive? How much jiggle physics is too much? What is the quota of boobies, wieners, and peepees that I'm allowed to meet before I'm officially in bad territory? This also applies to the baby murder. This game has like 7 trillion scenes of dead babies. Did removing a few animations really make the difference? This sort of massively arbitrary and inconsistent logic just goes to show that censorship is never about protecting the public, but always about authoritarian control over what other people are allowed to think, say, and do. And what I find particularly infuriating about pro-censorship arguments is that proponents of censorship always hide behind the bullshit line of, we want to protect the kids. If you're a parent and you can't figure out either of these enormously simple rating systems designed specifically to protect kids from content you don't want them to see, you deserve to have your child traumatized. If any of this was really about protecting sweet, innocent children, then the ESRB wouldn't have the AO rating waiting as a trap to spring on any game they deem apparently to be for some sort of turbo adult, since they already have an M rating for normal adults. And Pegi wouldn't have the vaguest fucking possible description of what Pegi 18 means, so that they can twist it to fit whatever narrative they would like. When it's boiled down to its simplest form, Agony is merely a series of ones and zeros that when decoded by a computer causes the pixels on your TV screen or monitor to change colors. And if you think Madmind Studios or any game developer shouldn't be able to arrange those colors in whatever way they want without the threat of being completely leveled by a massive lawsuit, you're a totally gigantic troglodyte. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. After I finished the editing for this video, I saw an update about Agony that I decided to include on the end here. It looks like Madmind Studio has sort of won their censorship battle. They're going to be releasing Agony unrated for PC at some point, which is going to include all of the patches the game has had so far, all of the cut content, as well as additional content and additional patching to make the game a little bit more palatable. They state that they're going to either offer the game at a 99% discount on Steam or offer it as free DLC. This is great, and after this is released, I might check it out to see if the game has improved enough to the point where I would change my opinion on it. And once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.